Good afternoon and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. We've not received any apologies for absence at all. Minutes of previous meeting then. Do we have any points we wish to raise on the minutes of the previous meeting? We are chasing up some information that's still outstanding from the items that we had last time, and that will be circulated when received. Yes? Are there any other questions on the minutes of the meeting? Do we agree those minutes then? Thank you. Interests. Do any councillors have any interests to declare? No. Admission of the public. All items are to be held in public today. Deputations and petitions. We don't have any. Public question time. There's nobody here for questions today. So we move swiftly on then to the leader of the council's priorities for 1920, and Councillor Pandor is here to share with us his priorities for the coming year. Councillor Pandor.
It took a long time because we wanted to make sure that it was a proper master plan, looking at what the opportunities and the threats were around the Huddersfield Town Centre, but at the same time actually springboarding it into the 21st century and beyond. And that's why it's really important that we actually did do the deal to actually buy the piazza, because without buying that piazza, the plans wouldn't really actually work, and it actually shows investors and our partners that we actually do mean business, that we've actually put our money up front in delivering the master plan over the next 5 to 10 years. Good news was we had over 1 million hits on social media, which is really brilliant. And we got a lot of good publicity across, not just locally, but also nationally, and some interest internationally as well. In terms of what that means, the key thing is to deliver the heart of our culture within that part of the town. And it's actually not just about Huddersfield, but also we developing plans as we speak for Dewsbury. If people kept an eye on what's happening nationally, but we've just been successful in actually getting through the Transforming Cities Fund. I can't remember what exactly it is, but it's a bid that we put to government, and we got a letter back saying that we've actually been shortlisted to actually go through. So hopefully that will be bringing in extra resources in Dewsbury. And we're also going to be developing a master plan for Batley in the next few months. But at the same time, with the towns and villages, we'll also be getting some investment. The other thing is, many members will know, but some may not know, so my apologies if I'm repeating stuff that you already know, but we had an LGA peer challenge. That report is actually getting finalised, and hopefully that report will be published very shortly. The highlights of that was we are actually on a positive move forward in terms of what the council stands for. You recognise that we've got very solid ambitions with some detail underneath it to deliver our golden thread throughout the administration. And at the same time, he actually says in the report that there's some challenges that we need to face up to, but the challenges we've actually got on our radar. He also talks about the CCGs. We've got 2 CCGs, one in north and one in south. And that is a problem, because that's not actually joining up the priorities that we would expect the Kirklees residents to actually benefit from, because the CCGs are too focused on process, whereas we're trying to focus on outcomes across the whole of the council. So that's something that I'd like the Scrutiny Committee or relevant lead member for Scrutiny to look at, in terms of how we can actually start to break down the barriers between the 2 CCGs, working in isolation. Because what I'm interested in is actually making sure that them barriers are broken down, and that will be highlighted in the report. That's just a key feature I thought I'd just mention. You'll recall back in February last year, I presented the budget to full council, and the priorities were investing in the most vulnerable people in our communities, investment that strengthens our commitment to children and young people, and that was evident in the recent Children's Service Inspection report. At the same time, we've actually beefed up our capital plan, and through that we've actually been able to regenerate and rejuvenate our infrastructure. So there's some very clear messages. At the same time, we need to focus on a strong economy that actually promotes inclusive growth. That's the key challenge that I'm actually addressing, and there's been a number of presentations that have been done on different areas. I chair the Kirklees Inclusive Growth Forum, and within that there's a whole work programme which I can share with members if you want, in terms of what the kind of stuff we're doing in terms of procurement, in terms of using anchor organisations to actually make sure that we pay a living wage, in terms of how we develop the third sector, and how we actually keep the pound within Kirklees. Equality and diversity is in its widest sense. Equality and diversity isn't just about ethnicity. It's also about disability. It's also about LGBT rights. Last week I actually went to an event at the Mid Yorkshire Hospital Trust called Project Search, which is a worldwide initiative which actually is looking at employing young disabled people into the Mid Yorkshire Hospital Trust, and Kirklees is quite an important player in that. And one of the things I said there was, it's really important that we actually promote people with disabilities, learning difficulties, because when we get patients or our citizens that go to these institutions, when they have got somebody on the other side, in terms of listening to them, hearing their views, people feel more connected. So it's not just about representation, but it's a representation in its broadest sense. And diversity also plays a big part in that. Let me just... the other thing which is a priority for me is place-based working. Now, this is an initiative that was actually launched in February, and there was a report that went to the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee in terms of making sure that the lead member who's actually responsible for this is actually recognised, because it's such a high-profile piece of work that we need to get this right. One of the things that the Peer Challenge report identified is place-based working. That is actually quite a very, very solid foundation we set. This actually puts elected members at the heart of everything we do. It's not a reinvention of area committees or the district committees, and the members that I've engaged with it so far are actually very, very keen and very passionate to actually make sure that that agenda is driving forward, and that's where we put in £1 million around mental health and £0.4 million on domestic violence. So hopefully schemes will be starting to get developed, and hopefully we'll start to see the meat on the bones develop over time. And I'm very passionate and very keen that this works, and so are the members who are actually leading on these. We need to actually make sure that we actually do get some quick wins in terms of how this initiative works. Final thing, Chair, that I want to talk about is Greener Kirklees. I've got a cabinet member now who's actually focused on Greener Kirklees. You remember that we were one of the first local authorities that actually took a climate emergency through council on a more or less cross-party basis. We've got a cross-party working group that's actually working on that already. They will be reporting back hopefully in the next month or month after. But one of the things that I'm focused on is we can't leave things to chance. We've got to do stuff. We've got to actually make sure that all the evidence that's been put forward, namely through Sir Richard Attenborough, who actually highlighted it through national TV, it's not too late, but the only way we can actually address the issues that are concerned to the climate is to actually start doing stuff. And hopefully when this report comes back, like I said, I'm not on the working party, I think Andrew is, so hopefully there'll be a lot of things that we'll be able to do very, very quickly, and more, because that won't be the end, that'll be the beginning. And hopefully, you'll see some highlights coming out in the budget process next year, because this is something that is very important to our future generations. Young people are taking it very, very seriously, and all politicians who need to take it very seriously as well. The final thing is around community and community safety. Recently there's been a lot of press around gangs, around sort of violent gangs, knife attacks, happening across the piece. And this was highlighted to myself and the Cabinet in recent months. So what we started to do through Rachel's team is to actually start to have ward meetings very, very early doors. And the only way we can actually address the issues that we're facing in our communities is actually working in partnership. We can't do it ourselves, the police can't do it themselves, and it's only working in collaboration and in partnership with organisations and with elected members that we actually start to address the issues that we're facing and start to develop some community resilience that'll make sure that, you know, we actually improve and impact on people's lives in a positive way. A lot of it is around fear, but at the same time, you know, in a number of wards, like, it's not just about fear, it's actually about violence and gangs actually going about unlawful business, right? That's impacting on local communities. But again, elected members are at the heart of that. My new cabinet member, Carol Patterson, actually is looking at the whole situation around policing, and she's very keen to actually get to grips with what the issues are and how we can address them. Really pleasing that, you know, the new Prime Minister, you know, announced that policing is a priority, and I welcome that move. But we need to actually start to put meat on the bones now to actually make it all work. And a final thing, you know, children, we need to make sure that, you know, they get the best start in school. So again, this is a key indicator that we need to start look at. How household incomes, trying to actually get most out of people's household incomes, and community to feel safe. So I've just gave you a quick resume of what my priorities are, but I'll be happy to take questions, not just my priorities, but my cabinets as well, because a lot of the things that I've mentioned will be delivered by my portfolio holders. So thanks, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Questions then, Councillor Patel, yeah.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me. Sorry. I'm sorry I was late as well, Chair. I had a problem with my buses today, so I'm sorry about that. Thank you for your report, and sorry for missing the beginning of it. Just a couple of points that I wanted to raise was on, well, one on gangs and community safety, something that I feel quite strongly about given some of the particular issues in my ward, and I've met with Rachel and the team, and I was really happy to see that those meetings have been put in place. I think for me it also comes down to economics of the situation, really. So we are seeing spikes in particularly deprived communities. So for me, I'd like to see how it's linked up with our economic strategy, the work that we're doing with the youth detached teams. But overall, I think longer term, we need to have a longer term message about how do we change the narrative or provide an alternative to young people, which isn't gangs. And if I could just ask you one more thing, the settlement from the Chancellor, how I don't know if you'd already discussed this, but what impact do you think that will have in terms of the extra funding he's putting towards local government?
I'll take the final point first. The 3.whatever billion pound that's been announced in recent days, half of that will be actually raised through council tax and business rates. So it's actually half the money that's actually, you know, new money. But the devil's in the detail. Like this morning, I found out that we have a business rates pilot pool, and we have that on the basis that, you know, we have not got no arrangement for a mayor, elected mayor. But one of the things we found out very recently is that pilot pool, we won't get that money anymore because we don't have elected mayor. So there's a lot of, you know, detailed stuff to look at. The other thing is, you know, pressures on local government have actually been highlighted on an LGA basis, you know, for decades on a cross-party basis, right? Yeah. So the announcement is welcome, but, you know, we need longer-term solutions. You know, we can't be running budgets on a year-by-year basis with no long-term certainty, because you can't plan effectively. And there's a danger there that if you can't plan, then you don't spend the money. So you get all clawed back. So I thought I'd start with the Chancellor's budget first. In terms of the other stuff you mentioned, and you're right, you know, you're one of the wards that we actually did come out and have a look, because in your particular ward, Ashbrow, there's issues like in your other wards, and that's why Rachel and her team actually started to engage with your ward along with other wards to actually start to address the issues around gangs and knife crime and elected members, basically, because, you know, you didn't know what was happening in your own ward when you're the elected representative, and I think the police got the message very, very clear that, elected members are at the heart of the decision-making process and what happened in the communities, and hopefully that's going to improve, because only through proper communications will you actually be able to understand what the police is doing, and vice versa. You also mentioned around deprivation and social inequalities and social injustice, and how that has an impact on behaviour, and young people going into a spiral of unlawfulness because they've got nothing to do. And it's a shame that, our youth services that we used to have many years ago doesn't exist in the same shape or form now. And that's why in the budget we actually put in, can't tell you exactly what figure, but we put a substantial amount of money back into youth services and children's services. And an idea that is being explored is having youth zones, which is a national concept. Other areas have got these youth zones, and it actually gives young people an avenue to actually go and do stuff that they feel that they can contribute back into community, and starts to put the skills and starts to put some ambition back in young people in terms of what they want to do, and for them not to then sort of like be misled and misguided and groomed into basically unlawful activities. So that's a massive impact. And there was a report done nationally, but there's been many reports done nationally that it's completely proves the correlation between austerity and crime. So hopefully, the government is getting that message across, and that's why they're going to be investing 20,000 extra police officers in our streets. Yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. You've not got housing down as a priority, Shabir. Is that still, housing and homelessness still a priority for the council?
I'm glad you said that. Housing is a priority, and one of the key priorities actually is you probably might know, Andrew, because you've just come back, but K&H is going through a review, and one of the reviews that we're looking at in terms of how can we actually address housing holistically, and K&H is part of that. We've also got a massive housing building programme in a local plan, as you're well aware, that was approved in full council, and we also see homelessness on the increase. We also see rough sleepers on the increase, and we also see issues on affordability. So housing is a priority. The way forward really is to actually get a proper housing strategy group that actually works, not just council or councillors, but on a very broad basis, right? Yeah, because again, unless you actually get that proper housing strategy group formed and working, that actually engages all housing providers and everybody who's got a stake in housing, we won't address that. So that is something that I've asked Peter McBride to actually start looking at. So yes, housing is a priority.
Thanks, Councillor Pandor. The Huddersfield Blueprint, that was great. A really good launch for that. So pleased that went so well. I wonder about the moving picture going forward. And when we're looking at things like the governance of the Huddersfield Blueprint project, when we're looking at the ownership of it, where we're looking at involvement from different organisations, I do wonder about how we're going to go about that, because it seems to be held very close. As a ward member for Huddersfield, I got to know about a few hours before everybody else a lot of the details. So I was a wee bit miffed by that. I think it's probably fair to say. The other thing that occurs to me is the rise of organisations like Huddersfield Unlimited. And you look at their terms of reference, you look at the things that they're doing, and it's pretty much the same objectives as the council has. And you look at that and you think, if we don't grab a hold of this, then we could lose the initiative here, and that we could be seen as people who are being led by a self-appointing organisation, which they are. So I wonder about how we regain, if that's what we need to do, control of that agenda. So that's interesting to me. I know we can work together on things and all those sort of things, but I think we need to look a bit more on that. The other thing I'd be interested in is you said about keeping the pound in Kirklees. I'd be interested in some reflection on how you're going to keep the pound in Kirklees and what that looks like in terms of some of the economic approaches you might take to make that happen.
Can you also expand when you're talking about the Huddersfield Town Centre Master Plan? Maybe it'd be good to also talk about what lessons you're going to learn for the Dewsbury and Batley one as well. Yeah? Yeah?
Thanks, Councillor Cooper, for your questions. Firstly, in terms of Huddersfield Master Print, as we speak, I've asked officers to start working on some finer further details, because what I said to Jackie last week was, we've got this blueprint, you know, we've got the piazza, we bought it out, we've actually kitchen a shop out in terms of, you know, like a project office or customer service centre for that particular scheme. But what we now need to do is start actually putting the meat on the bone, start putting some key timescales in terms of when things are going to be done. Because you can't just have a plan and then it just gathers dust. We need to actually now start to say, like you say, that moving picture. The picture cannot be static. The picture has got to be moving. So as soon as I get the detailed timescales communicated to me, I will make sure that this committee gets a copy of that. And at the same time, I'll make sure that every other councillor gets sight of that as well. The governance around all that, again, it's really, really important that we get the governance right. And you mentioned Huddersfield Unlimited, is it? Or Limited? Unlimited. Huddersfield Unlimited, which I don't have a problem with the organisation, but what I am mindful of, not just about Huddersfield Unlimited, but also if it's Dewsbury or Batley or Holmfirth or wherever, that the council has got to be the strategic and enabling organisation. You know, we in this room are elected representatives, you know, so we have a democratic mandate to actually make sure that, you know, we actually do the best for all citizens in Kirklees. And that is why I made it very, very clear that although I value and I've got a lot of time for organisations like Huddersfield Unlimited, you know, they are not the council, you know, and when I look at any initiative wherever, I've got to look at the whole of the council, so I can't just allow one organisation to actually do what the council is doing. You know, I will engage with organisations to actually add value, but the council has got to be the strategic player. The governance has got to be around the council and everything else that goes with it. So yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. You know, I echo what you're saying, and you know, there is only one council, and there's only one council that will deliver the council services, be it for the master plan or economic development in Huddersfield or Dewsbury or Batley. You know, there is only one council. Yeah.
I welcome that. I think the thing that I'm trying to say is we agree. It's the how. You know, how is the council going to take back the initiative, if you like? How's the council going to be in the driving seat when there are other organisations like that operating in the same field as us?
Well, to make it very, very clear that the council is the accountable organisation, and secondly, right, yeah, any initiative that comes out from them, the council will actually be very, very clear that if that meets our criteria and our objective, or if it doesn't. If it does, then, you know, I don't have a problem with working with them. But the book has got to be with the council. It's got to stop with the council, and the overall accountability has got to be the council. We can't have two councils, right? Yeah. In terms of you mentioned Dewsbury and Batley, I'll try and take that at the same time. What in terms of lessons learned? Just what.
Well, the question was about the governance of Huddersfield's master plan, wasn't it? And you mentioned about a Dewsbury master plan and a Batley master plan. So if you've got concerns that have been raised on the Huddersfield master plan, how are you learning those lessons around the governance of the other master plans as well?
Yeah, I think it's a bit early doors in terms of lessons learned from the Huddersfield master plan, because, to be honest with you, one of the key things for me was the lesson that was learned was that time spent in actually looking at the detail, talking to private sector organisations, talking to the people who actually own the piazza, was time well spent. Although there was a lot of pressure on me to actually come up with a plan and timescales, you know, I had to hold my nerve to make sure that, you know, we actually got the detail right, because if you got the detail wrong, we would have actually been put over a barrel in terms of the piazza. Because while you're talking with organisations that own the piazza, if that confidential, commercially sensitive information came out, then it would have been detrimental to the council. So I think that was the biggest lesson to learn, because I was very close at one point to actually going public, but I didn't. And I think that was the right move to make, because as councillors, not just cabinet members, but as councillors per se, we do come under a lot of pressure, and what we tend to do is react and try and give a off-the-cuff answer. Politically, that might be acceptable. Politically, it might take us out of a sticky situation, but I think the long-term impact is that actually you'll always get found out, and you actually come back and bites you. And as long as you hold your nerve and you're very, very clear, then, you know, as events unfold, the public will see the reality of what you're doing. So I think that's the key thing, because believe me, I'm under a lot of pressure to come up with master plans for Dewsbury and Batley. But until the master plan is actually finalised and all the T's are crossed and I's dotted, yeah, I will not be tempted to actually release that plan. And politically, you know, it might not be acceptable, but politically, in the long term, it is acceptable, because that's what we owe our community. That's the biggest plan.
Just quickly, just a thought. If Huddersfield Unlimited said, right, what's the next thing we're going to do? Oh, I think we should hold a conference about the future of Huddersfield. And if they were to, and we'll invite the council, because they've got something to do here. You know, we can do that. We're an independent organisation. That would be them taking the initiative. That would be them taking ownership of the space that we should be operating in. And I look at that and I think, actually, shouldn't we be organising something saying, here's the Huddersfield Blueprint results. Here are some of the things that people have said. Here's reflect on. You know what? We might invite those Huddersfield Unlimited people to come to it, to maybe have a chat. That's us taking ownership and us taking control, and us having a great say. So those are the sort of things, you know, in terms of how that would be the sort of thing to look at, and the ongoing governance of it. I think it'd be good for the council to draw people in, almost like a board for the Huddersfield Blueprint, to take ownership of it. So we are definitely drawing people in, but we're in control.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying regarding the board and the overall governance of the master plan, Huddersfield master plan. As far as I'm concerned, the cabinet has got the ultimate responsibility and accountability. You know, if the cabinet, through whatever means it decides to actually draw up a wider range of people, then it'll be the council's call. In terms of Huddersfield Limited, right? Yeah, you know, that's just one organisation. You know, we've got a number of organisations, and I don't want to talk too much about Huddersfield Limited. I think my position is very, very clear that, you know, there are a range of partners, but the ultimate, and they're the bids, the new business improvement district, right? Yeah, so there's a range of folk that will be actually stakeholders. And we need to work with all of them. The Huddersfield University as well, who's got massive presence in the town centre. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. You know, we need to actually draw in as wider audience as possible, but the ultimate accountability and the ultimate direction will be with the cabinet.
All right. Can I ask, while we're on the subject of business, one of your roles is as leader is strategic leadership for the organisation, and etc. And you've mentioned about a strong economy in Kirklees, and getting the most for people in Kirklees. We also mentioned about place-based working. And one of the items in the report that we shall have for the next item mentions about more linkages with businesses, so bringing business more into the discussions. And so I'm wondering how, on a strategic level, you are leading the council in having more discussions with businesses in general across the different priorities.
Yes, thanks, Chair. A very good question. The strategic leadership I play in terms of making sure that we engage with business is actually my presence. You know, my presence at combined authority level, my presence on the LET board. You know, I'm quite instrumental in actually, you know, engaging with not just other leaders but also other business leaders. At MIPIM UK, MIPIM Europe, you know, I've been there a number of times. and it's at MIPIM Europe, where I met some agents who were responsible for the Tesco site in Batley, multi-million pound site, and it was through that link that we managed to actually regenerate that part of the Tesco's old site that had been empty for at least about 20 years. So that's where the business strategic leadership came in. I'm actually going to London on Wednesday, and I'm meeting a number of high-profile organisations that operate in Kirklees, but at the same time they've got a presence in India, and at the same time meeting the Indian High Commissioner, because these are big open community economies that will actually have a local impact. So again, that's showing strategic leadership at a national level with some international presence that will actually have a local impact. And I also went to China last year, and yep.
So, connections with local businesses that are just local to Kirklees. How are you doing that?
I'm talking to as many businesses as I can, and one of the good examples is, without mentioning too much detail, is I wasn't aware that we actually have one of the world's, if not Europe's, diamond jewellery distributor, who lives in Savile, who I actually grew up with his older brother, and he came to see me, and then when I said to him what do you do, he said, I deal in diamonds. So, well, and he showed me a piece of jewellery that was worth 2.5 million quid. I went to see him, and he said he wants a bigger premise, because what he doesn't want to do is move out of Kirklees. And when I found out what he does, I immediately went back to Jackie and said, look, we've got people like this in Kirklees, and we want to make sure they actually have A1 office spaces. So when he gets people like Jimmy Choo, I didn't know who he was until I met him, but apparently he's a Chinese tycoon who's one of his customers coming to a place in North Kirklees, that as you're driving down the road, right, yeah, it looks like, not really pleasing, right? Yeah, we need to sort of like, make sure that we actually create that A1 office space where international customers can actually come and say, right, we're going somewhere, quite different.
So, my next follow-on question then is about the council providing, being a hub for information for businesses and residents. And please be assured that my question is non-political. No, it doesn't. It means it's about information provision, okay? It is not political in any shape or form. And the Economy and Neighbourhoods Scrutiny panel has already asked questions on this area. All the other West Yorkshire councils are providing information on their websites for residents and businesses alike on leaving the European Union, with the exception of Kirklees. Okay, so I can understand what you're saying about big business but it's also the council's role, is it not, to provide information as well? And as a lot of the other West Yorkshire councils pages, they provide links to information. So they're being the information hub, as it were, for people to go and have a look. But Kirklees Council, I can't find it on the website. So what I'm wondering is how you as leader are providing the direction for providing information for businesses at this moment in time. And my question is definitely not political.
Yeah. Yeah, you're completely right to actually raise that. Yeah, I wasn't aware that we don't provide any information on the Kirklees Council website, and if we do, it sounds like it's very difficult to find. So as soon as I go from this room, I will make inquiries and find out what exactly is it we're providing. What I will also do, not just that, but I'll also look at what others are providing and try and actually make sure that we actually provide better information than our neighbours, because I always like to be top of the class. But thanks, Liz. First thing I do, I will actually raise that.
Okay, so we heard a fair bit about your presence and how your presence is helping promote business and get business involved. I should go back to a question I mentioned earlier on, which was about. I'll cut to the chase a wee bit, but it was about how do we actually keep more money in the local economy. And one of the things I'd be looking for that, to see it in a sustained fashion, would be promoting locally owned and locally managed businesses. So keeping that, so we're not, if you like, getting some of these big companies which take money out of the economy, but smaller locally owned and locally managed companies. What are we doing specifically to help those companies, because they are generally better for our local economy?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I did forget, and you did ask me. That's my apologies, Andrew. Firstly, what we're doing is with our procurement, what we're doing is we're actually breaking up the contracts. By breaking the contracts, what you can then do, you can actually engage and encourage more smaller firms that are local to actually bid for them. And we're actually doing quite a lot of work around adult social care, because usually with adult social care, you've got big companies, national companies, who will actually bid on block. And we've got no say. And if they go bankrupt, belly up, then we've got to pick the pieces. So what we're doing is we're developing 2 social enterprises, one in the Corn Valley on social care, and the other one's going to be developing in North Kirklees, but that's at a very early stage. So again, it's actually developing these sort of like small social care co-ops that can actually keep that money in Kirklees, and by breaking the contracts into smaller chunks, it allows small organisations to actually bid, hence keeping the money locally. And a very good example on something very similar, right, yeah, that I actually just only came across a few days ago, was we have got a lot of small firms, trades, like builders, landscape architects, plumbers, joiners, and when you talk to them, they won't have a clue about how to actually procure council contracts. And if you go to our neighbouring authorities, they're in a similar situation. But I asked a question recently to our procurement people that how do local firms bid in to win council contracts? So we've got all the information there. There's all the links, how to actually register, not just at a local level, but also on a Yorkshire level, and also on a national level. So it's the stuff you were saying earlier on, Councillor Smith, is how do we get our communications out there? Because everything's on PCs and websites. A lot of the builders don't know where to find it. A lot of builders probably won't be IT literate, so there's an issue there. A lot of small traders won't have that kind of capacity, right? Yeah, so it's also around information and how we actually make sure that information is communicated properly. And it's also about looking at our asset base in terms of getting community organisations to actually start to sort of like look at how they can actually start to contribute to the overall well-being of the council, and that's where we've actually increased the grant funding for actually organisations to actually do something more with assets. And the other thing is, I mentioned the council, the university, the hospitals. These are all big anchor organisations. The university, they have millions of pounds worth of contracts. So through the inclusive growth group, what I'm doing is I'm trying to actually sell the idea that we're trying to generate in Kirklees, and also trying to learn from them in terms of how we can actually keep that wealth locally. And Cummins, to the Gears place, they came to do a presentation at one of the inclusive growth panels, and the kind of work they do to actually generate local income, generate local wealth, was really, really brilliant. Really great, and there's lessons we can learn from private companies. So there's some of the kinds of initiatives that we're doing. But what I'll do is I'll share with you I've got a spreadsheet, right, with everything on it. It's quite easy to read. I'll share with you that, so you got more information, because I can't recall everything off memory. I'm all human being.
Yeah, just quickly. Examples are great. The guy with the diamonds and stuff, and the other examples you gave. I suppose really from the council, what I'd be looking for from the council is a strategic approach. How are we actually helping locally owned, locally managed businesses? How is that prioritised above other things? How are we doing that? You mentioned the contracts. That was a good thing, but I'd like to see something a bit more meaty, a bit more substantial. Something where we can demonstrate that maybe it's at the heart of the Huddersfield Blueprint. Maybe there's an area within the Huddersfield Blueprint that's dedicated to locally owned, locally managed businesses. But I think something a wee bit more.
We have got that, and at the moment, and again, these are figures I'm quoting off the top of my head, so I might be wrong, but these are just sort of trying to recall from my memory. At the moment, we spend about around £100 million on local firms. What we want to do is, over the next few years, increase that by a further 90 million. And that overall picture in terms of what the overall strategy is and what it means at detail level is all there. But I can't recall that because I've got that much stuff in my head, and I'd be superhuman. But what I will do, I will send you that overall strategy. Yeah, and it's saying black and white. It's on the website as well. But I'll send you that.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to follow up on what Andrew said, actually, and I think probably some of it's been covered. But obviously, we've got the community wealth building programme that's in place, and that's specifically what you mentioned on the pound. The whole idea of that is making sure that Huddersfield, Kirklees, Dewsbury benefit from local businesses, and the money that's spent is benefiting, Huddersfield businesses. I would have thought one of the ways we can progress that is through the anchor institutions that we're trying to build. I think you're right. I think there is, and I think at our recent Economies Enabled Scrutiny panel, we talked about engagement specifically in terms of the blueprint. And there is more to do with small business. I think we all recognise that, and sometimes it's a little bit more trickier to do that continual engagement. But I think one of the ways to build it is through the work that you're already doing on the community wealth building process. It seems to already fit into that, doesn't it? And then you mentioned about feedback as well from the place standard. You'd mentioned how are you going to sort of feedback some of the stuff that's going on with the place standard tool. I think you'd asked that in your first question. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the only thing I just wanted to say I'll just be quick, was just I would have thought you would do some feedback session on that in terms of, maybe I'll ask it later.
I think Councillor Cooper's point was the feedback on the blueprints. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Can we ask then, you mentioned about the golden thread. So what is your golden thread for the organisation then?
That to be actually embedded right through the organisation. So if you go to somebody who's actually sweeping the road and you ask them, what is it you're doing? That person won't say I'm sweeping the road. That person says I'm trying to address Councillor Pando's golden thread. But because by keeping the streets clean, we create a better environment. By having a better environment, we've got better roads. By having better roads, you've got better infrastructure. And then the guy who we're talking about, who deals in diamonds, right? Will actually say, great, this is the place to be, and I want to make sure that I keep my firm in Kirklees. You look puzzled, Liz.
Yes, I am puzzled. Yes. So the way you wish the organisation to go is for everybody to help businesses or come into Kirklees, or what is the message that you want the thread to run through the whole of the Kirklees Council that everybody is working towards?
I'm sure members are aware of the council's 7 ambitions. Or is it 6? 7 ambitions. Yeah. So when you actually look at the 7 ambitions, the golden thread should be that if you look at any element of them 7 outcomes, you can actually follow through and saying that's a golden thread that goes to a local frontline officer level. So every single person should be able to actually identify with one of the 7 outcomes or more, and that is the golden thread I'm talking about.
elected members being at the heart of the organisation. So how are you promoting that through the organisation, through the council, to ensure that that actually works? And what is your interpretation of local elected members being at the heart of the council?
Well, local elected members, every time I go, not just to talk to members, I was talking to staff with Jackie on a number of occasions, part of the staff roadshows. And one of the things I say is that the democratic process has got to work in Kirklees. It doesn't matter which party politicians are from, they have got a democratic mandate. And it's going back to Harpreet's early point that if you don't know what's happening in your local community, you know, where you've got big policing issues, then democracy isn't working in that area as far as I'm concerned. So there's some councillors that are really, really good and they get it and they want to be involved in everything and they've got the finger on the pulse at a local community level. And then you've got some councillors who might need a bit of help and a bit of encouragement. So what I've done, and again this is part of the budget process, that we've actually put in some resources to actually help develop, help give capacity to local members. Because, you know, sometimes, right, yeah, they might not be aware of the skills or they might not have the expertise or knowledge to actually be able to engage. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that, you know, I do everything so there's no excuses. So in the next few years' time, right, yeah, you know, when they say, oh, well, we haven't got this, we haven't got that, I said, well, you've been given all the training, all the tools to do your job. And you should be representing your communities because you are the pulse, you are the heartbeat of your community. And I really believe that, you know, elected members are the core face of all the communities that they serve.
Right, are there any other questions? No? No? Okay. The LGA Peer Challenge, when we get on to the work plan, we'll mention that. That should be coming to scrutiny, okay. That's one of the things you mentioned, the review findings coming to scrutiny. And you mentioned about the climate emergency, and we had that at the last scrutiny meeting, okay. All right, so thank you very much, Councillor Pandor, thank you. Right then, we'll move swiftly on then to place-based work in the update report. I believe there is a presentation for this, yes. Rachel. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the panel for inviting me today. You will have had the report and quite a number of appendices. As you can see, what we've tried to do today is to give you all the information about all the elements that make up place-based working. There's a number of recommendations in the report in relation to what we would ask for some support and a sort of a direction of travel from scrutiny, but obviously if there's any other comments or questions you want to make as I run through the presentation, then let me know. What I'd like to cover today is the things that are on the screen now, which is just giving a reminder of the strategic context for place-based working, a little bit about place partnerships, which the leader alluded to in his updates, the arrangements going forward for ward and sub-ward partnerships, how we're getting on with citizen engagement and place standard activity, and what we're doing in the background around how we strategically coordinate our resources to be able to make this happen. How much time have I got, Chair, please? 10 minutes tops, right, okay. So very quickly, this diagram just illustrates how, if you start with people at the heart, what are the different lenses in which citizens of Kirklees are likely to get an interaction with the council. We obviously have at the top where we might set the strategy or the context for what we're doing within across Kirklees as a place. There's then the lens of people who are having a need and need a service, and how do we actually ensure that they get that service in the most effective way. But actually a place-based working lens is perhaps how we much more proactively engage with communities in a way that understands their needs and assets and helps them to fulfil them with our support rather than them being done to by the council. So why place-based working? In the main, and I'm sure you are all massive advocates for this, it's communities that are best placed to know their own challenges and strengths they have within them, but they can't always achieve those changes by themselves. I think we need to think about place being the whole system that people live, work and play, and all the organisations involved. So this isn't just about the council, this is about how we work with our partners and how we can bring services closer to the people receiving them, and ideally, in the longer term for me, how we co-produce some of those solutions together rather than that being a top-down determined answer. What it means to the council, it's one of the core elements of the corporate plan. How we use information, insight, intelligence to understand how those 7 shared outcomes that Councillor Pandor mentioned, how do we understand how we need to do things differently in places to help our communities achieve those outcomes. How you understand geographical areas in terms of what makes sense for people as well as what makes sense for organisations. And again, I've mentioned the partners. I think that last point, one size fits all, cannot be the way we work in the future, because actually that's not going to be the case given the diversity we have across the district. So what it means in practice, how do we bring multi-agency teams together around a place and share their knowledge and skills? How do we actually work in the best interest of the community and the people and not the relevant organisations? How do we have different conversations, which isn't perhaps the way we've communicated before, so moving away from kind of very traditional consultation to much more of a relationship-based engagement. How we support people to help themselves, but in a way that doesn't feel like we're being patronising, but actually helps people to be able to feel confident about what they can contribute as well as what we can. And every contact counts. How we make sure that whoever is out there working on the front line, those connections are being used and explored as best they can. Just a quick on geographies, we talk a lot about geographical boundaries. There tends to be some debate there about what boundaries we should be working to. I think that actually we probably can't have one standard map of what geography we're going to work on, but what we need to be clear is that the council and its partners can respond whatever the geography we're talking about. So I think it's a given that 23 wards are the building blocks in terms of governance, and certainly from a council perspective. We've got 9 primary care networks that the CCGs are supporting GPs to come together around. We've got schools as community hubs. We've got a number of different geographies. What we need to be clear about is that as a council, and ideally with partners, we are coordinating our staff in a way that means they can respond to those different geographical footprints in terms of what those needs are. So part of the development of this programme will be to say, what geographical way do we need to work so that we can actually respond to something, whether it's at a very local level, village level, whether it's at a primary care network level, or whether it's at something on a different level. Okay. You had the Collaborate report in your packs. I've just put a couple of slides in to summarise that. We asked them to tell us as a partnership where we were with place-based working and what are the barriers and opportunities to going further. I just quite like this in terms of the shifts that they've proposed around moving from organisation to system, which is the point I made earlier about thinking about as from a person-centred approach, not from different organisations. Again, the second point there. Interestingly, our voluntary community sector totally start with people, whereas from a statutory organisation perspective, we often start with service. So how do we move people along? How can we be a different council, which I think just acknowledges that we've tried to be better, but have we fundamentally questioned whether what we're doing is right, and how does that reflect the diversity of our communities? And again, restorative, how do we work with people instead of doing to them? You recall annual council, we had the paper that came from the chief executive about place partnerships, ward and sub-ward partnerships, and what we were doing around place-based engagement. So a number of you will be aware of this, and I know it's been to different meetings, but The place partnerships principle is about how we can tackle issues that isn't necessarily make sense on a ward or sub-ward level, but it's not necessarily something that can be done at Kirklees level. So we've come up with 7 places which are based on demographics, so ethnicity, age, deprivation, and we've said, how could we group Kirklees into 7 places? In our pack information, as is some of the information about the cross-partnership citizen engagement reference group, and that's trying to get some oversight in terms of when we do engagement, are we sure it's adhering to those principles? How can we share some of the information and insight we've already got? And actually, where can we use place standards a little bit more effectively? We've worked with a company called the New Citizenship Project to try and help to create a core narrative, because, you know, and being from public health, I'm probably just as guilty as this. You know, we use terms like outcomes, we use a lot of language that actually to the majority of people it's not relevant, it doesn't make sense. And so how do we be a little bit better at saying, well, if we're going to work together, how can we use language and think about what's important to people that isn't going to be them describing an outcome that they want to achieve, I suspect. And we've been using Fieldhead and Ashbrow to have those conversations initially, and then that will help us to understand what the culture change is required across the council to be able to deliver against that. The place standard, we've done 8 neighbourhoods which cover 5 different wards, and about nearly 2,000 citizens have been engaged. We've got engagement planned in 19 neighbourhoods. These probably change every time because there's always requests coming in, but what's quite nice about it is some of them are very much council-led, that's been driven by the ward councillor. Some have been led by the community themselves, and some have been service-led, where we've been wanting to ask a specific question, but rather than just ask that question, we want to get a bit more of a sense about what people think about their place. And we're using it to engage around the master plan as well. And we've got a number of people trained, over 200. And what's quite nice is we've also got partners involved, so Locala, the CCG. So I think that's really positive in terms of that engagement. Very quickly then, myself and my 3 colleagues have been working on what the operating model needs to be to respond to this, because I'm sure you will agree that we can do all this engagement and have all these plans, but unless we've got staff working in a way that can respond effectively to that, we're going to fail at the first hurdle. And so partly for me that will be about how we come up with an operating model that doesn't move from service silos to geographical silos, which is always a risk when you move to a different way of working. So alongside myself, Carl, Mel and Richard working on what that would look like and which groups of staff will be involved in that, we're also looking at how we can create the conditions for that to be effective through the corporate centre. So that's about very much putting a place-based working stamp on some of our policies and procedures and making sure that we've got that confidence that we're not trying to do something over here and then our policies and procedures are holding us back. So in terms of the next steps, what we've tried to do today by coming to Scrutiny is to capture all the different bits of the jigsaw that make up place-based working. I think it's very clear that having done that, we need to work out the governance arrangements in terms of the next phases. We'll be coming round to the various political groups throughout September to talk through this presentation again. So if you've seen it, if you've heard it already several times, then it's not going to be a surprise. But clearly that's about trying to get that engagement and getting some steer and comments on it. And also a communication plan, because I think you'll all be aware, as the place partnerships was the bit that probably seemed the quick one to get some key messages out about. But actually it's important we communicate all of the programme and how everything fits together in it. So that's our key next steps. In the report, I think we asked a couple of specific questions. Would it help to just go through those now, or do you want to pause for questions first? Yeah.
Okay, all right, questions then. Anybody got any questions?
Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. It was interesting to hear. In terms of your partnerships and your delivery, I'm always interested in knowing how you're going to actually do the engagement, because particularly in Batley, you know, we've not seen anything in terms of the real culture change that we were talking about maybe 3 years ago. In terms of engagement, we seem to be engaging with the same people. You know, how are you proposing any new or innovative ideas to engage with the communities so we actually have an impact and we get the results that we're going to be looking for? Particularly with the communities section, again, you know, the partnerships that they seem to be working with, there's nothing new there. You know, more recently, you know, I've been trying to work with them, particularly around community cohesion, and the proposals that we're seeing are outdated. They're initiatives that we've delivered 10 years ago. So how are you actually going to change that culture or the delivery with this new proposal that you're putting to us?
Thank you. I think there's probably two answers to that. I think the first thing is that we've probably been guilty of looking at the only people who are going to do cohesion or the only people who are going to do community safety are the community cohesion team or the community safety team. What the operating model with this should do is say, well, actually, if community cohesion is an issue in an area, that's not just going to be the responsibility of one or two people, that will be the responsibility of all the staff who are aligned with that area. And actually that's about saying we're taking it out of almost like a professional technical role into something that's about relationships and having trusted understanding with people in the community so that we can start to understand what will work for cohesion in one area, because it doesn't necessarily going to be the same that operates in another. Cohesion more specifically, I think the idea is that strategy is being co-produced with the community, but this is obviously my portfolio as well, so what I would like to be assured of is that engagement has been with the right communities, so that will be part of understanding what that new strategy needs to be. But for me, it's about saying partnerships are beyond sometimes the very specific topic or the very specific team, and actually needs to think about all the resource that's within that area.
Because some areas don't have very much council resource in them at this moment in time. Councillor Ruppel.
Thank you, Chair. I can never tell if this is working because you can't hear, so must be good. So we're using the place-based tool in Ashbrow, and I'm actually quite excited by this approach. I think it's the right thing to do with the place-based working, but the question is, how do we do it with the resources that we've got? So I'd say the thing that's come up for me, and we're going through the engagement process now, it's very open. I like that. We're going in there without stating what we're going to do first, and I think that's good. So we're trying to identify what's happening, and we're talking to people at bus stops and the rest of it, like many councillors are. But the issue we're having is resource. So how do we make sure we've got enough people helping us do the work, because it's very intensive. It's conversations, it's, you know, door to door. It's about us going to citizens. And I think that's actually quite a culture change for this organisation. If we look at how we do consultation previously, this is about going beyond that and engaging continually with our residents. So how do we make sure that different departments buy into this? Because that's not happening at the moment. That's definitely some of the struggles that we're having, and making sure that this really is at the heart of the organisation. Because if we don't get this right, then it's going to be another thing that we've done and we've not quite done correctly. And I do think it is the right thing to do. I just want to make that point.
I think your point's right, and I think what the place standard work has demonstrated is that slide earlier where it said we've already trained over 200 people in the use of the place standard. That's a whole cohort right across council, service and partners. So I suppose what I'm saying is that once upon a time that would not necessarily have been the case. It would have been a case of we have staff who are trained particularly in doing engagement, and that's what they do, where in many respects we've had people who happen to be working in places, and sometimes not in those places, who are trained. And I think what we've found is culturally there's been an awful lot of, I guess, spin-off benefits to that, not just for the organisation, but for those staff as well. So I think it is a long journey. I don't disagree with you, but I think little examples of that demonstrate that actually they're working in a different way, and the cultural change that goes with it around genuine engagement, not consultation. I think we've already seen some good examples from which to build. Sorry.
I think you're right. And like, I know when we had our first session of the training, we had a room full of people, but then it's actually them being able to get the time off from their managers to actually then get involved in the process. And I know, because it's so intense what we're doing, we need a big group of people helping us at the moment. That's what we're struggling with in Ashbrow, I would say, at the moment, is that side of things. And that means those managers buying into this and knowing that this is important as well. And that's hard when they're already struggling day to day. I'm not saying that that's easy as well. So how do we do that?
To come on, it isn't easy, and I think interestingly, talking to Mel, Richard and Carl about how to approach this, it's very easy that I think in the Kirkleys of the past it would be like, right, we'll put a load of services into review, and let's face it, you do that, you get nothing happening for 6 months because everyone's frightened about their job, and you know it's not a nice time to be in. So what we've been trying to learn from is how we could do this in a way that helps those people who are really passionate about this become leaders in some of this. And some of the ideas we've been toying with are things like people who have a job as, I don't know, a community safety officer or whatever it might be. What is like an additional qualification that enables them to be more generic in terms of place-based working, and how do we support our staff development alongside that? So there's different techniques to doing that, but as far as we're concerned, certainly as an executive team, it isn't it's non-negotiable in terms of a way of working, but it's how, if we're saying we want to work with and not do to our communities, it's how we do that with our staff as well, which is also presents a bit of a challenge. But you know, I would always want to know if managers were blocking any kind of releasing staff to do this activity. So Carl and I are really clear that that isn't something that needs to be happening. So we're always finding out and flagging it and challenging it if that happens.
So we have a big pot of money. We have a £1 million, or is it 1.4 million for domestic violence as well? But we'll have a look at that. But some of this money, because we've had a slow start, the money is going to take a while to spend, and so obviously evaluation may take longer than we expect. There'll be a new round of place-based working, I presume, in the next financial year. I presume, with a different theme. So one of the things that concerns me is that will we be able to take advantage of the learning from year one before we go on to year two, and when we have a new round of funds, a new theme, all those sort of things. So that's I'd be interested in your reflections on that if I've got that right. The other aspect of this is the Huddersfield Town Centre is a place and is in the Newsham ward, and I'm acutely aware that that there's an awful lot of stuff mental health wise that's focused in Huddersfield. You know, a lot in terms of partners, in terms of a lot of the issues that we actually have. You know, we've got partners like Platform One, we've got partners like Huddersfield Mission, some of the alcohol projects that we've got, all related to mental health, and so I've got a range of ideas in terms of what we could do with the funding. But given that some places are bigger focuses for mental health issues, should we be focusing on need in those places more than in being equal?
In terms of the first part of your question, I think the communications that Jackie sent out last week or the week before regarding this gave some assurance that the leader has said that the money will roll over. That was to just deal with any anxiety that it needed to get spent early doors, and that's obviously based on feedback that came from corporate governance and audit and through other forums. I believe there will be another topic next year. I guess what we'd have to think about in terms of timing was, as you say, how we could do enough evaluation to be able to learn from what we've done this time to be able to look at the next topic. So without knowing what that topic might be and what the administration might identify it as, I'm not quite sure how the timing would work, but my understanding, certainly in relation to it going back to the allowances panel, is an expectation that we can evidence what's happened. in my view, I suppose if you take the commissioning cycle, quite a lot of the chunk of the time that's been done so far is about looking at that intelligence and asking for more detailed analysis. I guess if there is a new topic, that could take place alongside the evaluation, which will be done to try and see how that's run. It's a suggestion, I don't know. I think we have to take stock and go back to alliances in November in terms of how we've got on, so we might have a better idea then. And obviously we can come back to scrutiny in future and talk through how that's going in terms of the proposal. Your comment in relation to the specific wards within the areas, I think that's what makes this quite exciting, because if you are genuinely being intelligence-led and your intelligence tells you that you have an issue in, I don't know, a particular population with an issue, if there are more people with that particular issue with one area, then it would make sense for that to be where the resource goes. But that is something that place lead member would talk and discuss with yourselves as ward members and with the community in terms of what the solutions might be. I suspect what we will get is some very different answers from the 7 different places, but we'll just have to see how it goes.
So if that's, unless there's other things to...
A couple of questions before we get to that then. So, first of all, we are engaging with people on a more local level to help inform through the organisation. How is that information going to be used within the organisation, and create an expectation that people would like something to change or happen? Do we have the budget to be able to meet expectations that may be raised?
I think in terms of the first point, within the organisation, and actually also within partnerships, because I think that there'll be information that comes back from what we get that primary care networks would find hugely valuable in terms of, so we've already flagged that through the reference group so that partners are aware of the intelligence that's coming back. We've built in capacity around trying to make that intelligence something that we can share a little bit more broadly, and that's why the communication plan will not just be about what the programme's doing, it's going to be the outputs of that. So, for example, we had a council managers group last week where we used the outputs from the Shepley place standard engagement to say how could we respond to that as a council, to just get any sense of what barriers might be. I must say I think that it will be a real test of us as an organisation and a system in terms of how we respond to some of this, and it won't come as any surprise that the way this is likely to develop is that the things that come out first are probably going to be largely place mending or place fixing things, so the things that practically need sorting out in an area, and it's very likely that as we keep going round the loop they'll become more place shaping solutions, because actually we'll have dealt with the immediate issues. So what I and Carl are looking at is, as soon as that intelligence comes back, making sure that we're having the conversations about prioritising this and linking it to other initiatives such as some of the ward squad work that was put in last year. So it's not an exact science, but it's something that very much I'm with you, because there's nothing worse than asking people what they care about and promising to solve it and then not.
And don't get me on the ward squad work. Coming in a timely fashion and not just when available. Carl, you wanted to come in before I ask my next question?
Just add to that, is that okay? Because I think the other part of it is...
So how are you going to get over that? Because there are, to me, there are 2 sides of this, aren't there? There are the neighbourhoods and the talking to people and the putting in systems, and then there's the corporate change that's required as well. So how are you going to get the organisation to shift to what your report says is needed?
I think one of the interesting things, this is just my personal reflection, one of the interesting things that I think it was the guy that ran Sainsbury's did, and I don't know when this was, but what he did was he got all his senior staff to adopt a store that wasn't the one that they had any affiliation with, and it made it their business to learn everything about that store. I actually quite like that, because I think that as a council, probably the more senior you get, the less removed you are from the people, the places, the bits of Kirklees. Whereas if you're a frontline member of staff, you know your area inside and out. But you also know your service, and you know that your managers are expecting you to do a certain thing. So how do we shift where being part of a broader community and being able to have a conversation that might not be something you're performance managed on, but might be about helping the organisation achieve its objectives, how can that become something that we all do in our DNA? I don't know all the answers. What I do know is we can't do it just as a council, because if we do that, we'll just end up creating more issues. Through the partnership exec, we've got a cross-section of people who have been identified to take this work forward in terms of how do we need to work better and effectively that isn't in the way we've been doing now. There are multiple different approaches to this, and I think there will be some people who relish this and think it's what they've been waiting for, and there will be some people who this is not the direction of travel they want to be going in, and it won't feel comfortable with them as a way of working. So we'll expect a little bit of churn within the system. But there are really good examples when we learn from things like Wigan, who did their deal, to actually what we could apply in Kirklees that will create a mass culture change. But I think it's going to be one of those things where we will lose some people on the way, and we will get some new people and who are excited about that approach.
Yeah, we'll come in. Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Quite enjoyed the report, enjoyed the presentation. It's absolutely the right way to go. I want to focus on, my comments in the light of what you're asking us to come with, and Scrutiny's role in evaluating how effective this is going to be. I'm going to start off with a bit of a concern, because I think in terms that you talked about the performance management cycle, it would have been really good if a number of councils had been involved a bit earlier, given that, this is, my perception is this is the second go we've had it. We had 3 or 4 years ago, we had people trying to do something. Actually a bit of, engagement about how we're going to evaluate the outcomes we want to achieve from the project itself would have been really useful. And that's, again, Liz and I were building on our learning from neighbourhood renewal all those years ago about, what do we want to do, but how we're going to evaluate whether it's going to be effective or not. And that's not having a go at you. I just think that's a leadership issue. We know place-based working, because of the nature of Kirklees, we know place-based working is absolutely the way to go, but we need to make sure that it's working as effectively as possible. And so there might actually still be a little bit of a pause to think, what do we put in place so we can evaluate it? The two things I would want to evaluate, as to look at evaluating, is just the way of working, engaging with communities, we think it's a better way of working, but how can you evaluate it, and actually the ways of doing that. And I think one of the things that, and again, cause some of it comes back to the Democracy Commission, but also from Neighbourhood Renewal about perception surveys. It's fascinating when we're in it was amazing when we were in Dewsbury Town Hall talking to the residents who'd come to the Democracy Road shows. I sat on a table listening to people from one of our communities, the same overall community, but they lived in different wards, and the message they were getting back about their relationship with the council, my thought was it related how they engaged at ward level, and you could tell the difference. So there's already some of that going on. So actually perceptions of people about how they feel about how they've engaged with it. And it does come back to something that Liz has said. If you're going to ask people questions, you've got to be able to prepare to deal with the answers. And having resources, don't ask somebody what they want to do about mental health unless you can deal with that, because you're just setting yourself up for fail. So there's a process. I think the two themes that have been taken are really, are good for doing this: domestic violence and mental health. They've got cross-cutting. They know there's overarching stuff that can be done as well, but there's local things that can happen. And in terms of evaluation, what we would hope to do is see better mental health outcomes in our communities, however we want to define those, however we want to divide what better mental health was. And we should also, if the project works, be seeing lower incidents of domestic violence. And it just fill in with the point that Andrew Cooper made about the funding. I don't think £1 million is anywhere near enough money to deal with mental health issues. It might help us to do the project, but we've got to be tapping into the other resources that are there in primary health, in the social, other resources the council has, in terms of its mental health around social isolation, other resources that businesses or communities have. It's got to be about facilitating that, and we realise. So sometimes we get excited that we've got some money, but in this case, it's really got to be facilitating, because it's not anywhere near enough to deal with that. And again, the other issues are about timescales. If we're going to see positive outcomes for mental health resulting from this, it's got to have a much longer timescale than the timescales we're working to. I hope that we don't, in February next year, come with a different priority. I think mental health is going to see some of the outcomes we want to do. You're talking about some generational shifts. Our young people who might be in a family home where things are stressful, where that has an impact on their mental health. If we deal with what's happening there, you're going to see better outcomes at school. It's going to be a much, much longer time scale. And I would like to see some of that programmed in. And the other thing that, when we're getting back to engaging with our communities, is that communities having a long-term commitment to improving the outcomes in their area, not jumping from, so we've got a particular community cohesion issue, and we'll deal with that, and then something else comes on. So it might be domestic violence, or it might be gangs, or it might be knife crime. 10 years ago, it was antisocial behaviour. Antisocial behaviour has now become gang crime. It's become all of that as an underlying theme. So I think those are the two things in terms of what scrutiny can do. Can we scrutinise how the process gets better engagement with our communities? And I think that's going to be some sort of qualitative work, some perception type work. And scrutiny should be looking at the reduced incidence of domestic violence and the better mental health outcomes. How are we going to measure the effectiveness of that over time? And I think we need much longer time scales for that. Thank you.
We seem to be working on mental health a lot. Are we still doing domestic violence as part of this? Yeah. Okay.
Some information that I've received, it's more on the mental health side than the domestic violence side.
Well, there's 0.4 million, isn't there, for domestic violence? Right.
I think your information needs to be clearer that you're going to provide to councillors for those discussions, actually, that it is mental health and domestic violence. And also some of the information is, some of the links are to information from 2011. Now, presumably that is about census information, and so I think that needs to be made clear as well. But also it does have some information about groups that are working in an area, but it doesn't actually tell you what services are doing. So if the Mental Health Trust has something that it's doing in the area, or the council has something on domestic violence, or the police have something on domestic violence, you don't want the money to be recreating existing, presumably. You want to add value where you can, or boost, or you know what I mean? You don't want the money to be exactly duplicated. And so when you're having those discussions and you're talking to councillors about the locality working, I think it would be good to have some fuller information, actually. Are there any more questions on this point? Yeah.
Just a comment following on from what Liz has said, in terms of duplicating and whatever. I'd like to see new initiatives where, people feel that they belong to that community, and also they feel that they want to participate, because it goes back to that same sort of cycle where we're getting the usual people that are turning up even at neighbourhood level, and the real people, or the hard to reach people that are suffering from some of these issues. We don't seem to be, reaching those people. So, with this being a new initiative, I welcome that, and, that's what I'd like to see.
Okay, so we've considered and commented on the information set out in the report, I think. Have we done that? I would like to see some actual, on your Collaborate report, I know you're going to discuss it, but there are no timescales or anything or priorities of what you're going to prioritise or anything. So I think we ought to be seeing that when that is correct, when that's ready. Provide a steer with regards to the direction of next phase of work. So I think we've provided some of that there, haven't we? Yes. How we're considering moving forward as far as scrutiny is concerned. Now, this is where it gets a bit complex, I think, because you've got corporate change, you've got neighbourhood work, and you've got your mental health and your domestic violence locality lead work, right? So I think this is where it gets a little bit complicated. But talking about the organisation not being siloed, we don't want scrutiny to be siloed either. I think that's the thing. So I'm going to make a suggestion. If you think it's off the wall, then please say so. But I'm going to make a suggestion. Okay. Corporate and neighbourhoods scrutiny committees, obviously organisational change, working neighbourhoods, right? I'm wondering if those panels could ask for some volunteers and lead members be involved as well to form a little group to over the next till the end of this municipal year to monitor and scrutinise that work going forward, how the organisation is changing and how the neighbourhoods are being and the not talking to the same people, etc. Do you know what I mean? So you're not having to come to several panels or whatever, and it gives a wider councillor involvement as well from those panels. The mental health and domestic violence, I think, is a strategic thing as well as a locality. So maybe we ought to bring that back to management committee when you've got some meat on the bones, and we can bring it all together, and management committee can then see all the information and look at the way forward. Yeah? Is that what do lead members think? Just yes? Absolutely. Timescales, milestones, etc., outcomes. Yeah, you know, Rachel, don't you? Yeah? Okay. Does that work for everybody then? And officers can speak about how the neighbourhoods and corporate with yourselves, how you're going to operate that. Okay. All right. So we're not siloed either. All right. Thanks ever so much. Thank you. Right then, item 9, request to establish a joint scrutiny committee. This is page 53 in your papers. Right. So there is a request to put together a joint health scrutiny committee for work specifically on changes to vascular services. Vascular services are currently provided at Leeds, within CHFT and at Bradford Road Infirmary. And NHS England are the ones that are consulting. They are the commissioners in this case, and therefore it is going to be scrutinised at a West Yorkshire level because there are several authorities involved here. So we do at the moment have a West Yorkshire Joint Health Scrutiny Committee that meets informally, and at the moment that is the political balance has been suspended on that, and it is 2 members from the largest groups in the council. Traditionally on JOSCs we suspend political balance, and that is what I'm proposing, that we suspend political balance for this vascular services JOSC as well. I think it's important that people involved have an understanding as well of the Kirklees and Calderdale position as well. So my proposal is that we suspend political balance. We talk about the power of referral to be delegated to the joint committee. The power of referral would be for vascular services only that we would put in that joint health committee, and that would be subject to the terms of reference specifically stating that that is what that committee is for. Okay. So is everybody all right with that approach? Penny, do you want to say anything? Have we covered all the points that we need to cover?
Yeah, it's just understanding what ratio you are approving.
Yeah, so are we approving the one, if it's 2 members for the committee, then one from each of the largest groups on the council? Is that okay with everybody?
On this occasion,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And if there's another JOSC, obviously, that's put in, then we'll come back again and discuss it again. But that's where we are with that one. All right, yes?
Yeah,
And
fine.
the power referral would depend on the terms of reference. Yeah? And the terms of reference would need to come back to management committee for management committee to see as well. won't they?
Just thinking about the practicalities of that, because we don't want to hold anything up.
No.
So can they be circulated
Yeah.
with the final
Yeah.
sign-off
Would
by the
everybody be
chair?
all right if they're circulated in terms of committee? Right. Thank you very much. Right then, scrutiny lead member reports then. Councillor Cooper, your corporate scrutiny panel, anything to add on your report? Thank you. Councillor Uppal, have you got anything to say?
I think it's covered fairly well in the report, really, what we covered at the last scrutiny panel, and then we're going to be doing much more of a focus on waste at the next one. So.
Councillor Zaman? Much into
Everything's in the report. I mean, just one thing I'd like to highlight, and that's coming from the Ofsted report and my attendance at the Children's Improvement Board. It was about partnership working, came up as a focus, and looking how scrutiny panel can scrutinise effective partnership working. I think that's perhaps a cross-cutting issue. I know we've got something meeting coming up about effective scrutiny working, but that might be something we want to look at. I think the other thing that's cross-cutting, which came up, is how data is looked at, and how particularly how data is used, and how we scrutinise how data is used. That was a particular reference to looked after children, and it was very interesting listening to Elaine McShane telling us at a briefing how she used data to manage resources effectively. Perhaps that's a cross-cutting issue as well. Those were the two that, because sometimes there's a temptation for us to, my perception is we don't need to understand the data as well as the manager does, but we need to really do understand how they're using it, and we need to know what data we need to be seeing, information they should be looking at and what we should be looking at.
Yeah, so we'll take those up for the management committee then, okay. As far as myself is concerned, I've had several briefings with the Chief Executive and also with officers about the crime and disorder, because the management committee has a crime and disorder role, and so starting to get some information ahead of that. We are hoping that we can have updates from scrutiny at the council meeting. So Councillor Matchington, I wonder if you could cover a couple of items that have come up, such as the ad hoc. Yeah. Councillor Uppal, would you have anything that you would want to update on at this moment in time? Not at this moment in time. Okay. Councillor Zaman, have you got anything? I'm thinking you had that ambulatory care work, didn't you, at Dewsbury Hospital? I'm wondering if council might be interested in how that's progressing. Yeah, can you have a look at that then? Councillor Cooper, have you got anything at this moment in time? Okay, and I'll cover on the West Yorkshire side of things as well. Okay.
So that'll be on the same item as the annual report, are you thinking?
Yes, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
I'll let them
Okay,
know.
so we'll do that, and then the annual report, we've been working on that, haven't we?
It's there. Goes out tomorrow.
Right, okay. So you'll see that. And then we've got the training course at the end of September. If lead members could be there, if possible, and encourage your scrutiny members to attend as well, please. Okay.
Friday the
27th
27th,
of September.
1 till 3:30.
Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah, okay. If you can try, please, because it's about scrutiny going forward, how we got looking at the guidance and then discussing how we can move forward. And I thought as well it would be good if lead members could get together maybe October time for the outcomes to discuss moving scrutiny forward. Okay, Andrew.
Annual report. Is there anything in the annual report that we need to look at as panel chairs? Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so that's fine.
So I'll do a little bit of a resume on the annual report, okay, because obviously the panel chairs have all changed. All right, okay. Right then, and that leads us, I think, to the date of the next meeting. We're going to have an additional meeting of the committee in October. That's the peer review findings, isn't it? Hopefully. And Penny, we'll discuss dates just after this meeting, okay. And the next scheduled is the 4th of November. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.